is bringing out the worst in humanity towards bats. Many have suggested removing bat roots and even killing them, suspecting them to be carriers of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. The coronavirus detected in the Theropus and Rosetus species of bats from different states, including Kerala, have nothing to do with COVID-19, researchers have said. No virus that causes the spread of SARS-CoV-2 was detected from bats during a recent study carried out by the National Institute of Virology, Pune. Several wildlife researchers, including those specialized in bats, were concerned about the news, as it was feared that any wrong information on the role of bats in the spread of disease would lead to its mass killing. Before starting the webinar, I would like to introduce our resource persons. First of all, Rohit Chakraborty. Rohit Chakraborty is a doctoral research scholar in the Department of Evolutionary Ecology, Leibniz Institute of Zoo and Wildlife Research, Berlin. He has a postgraduate degree in wildlife biology and conservation, Wildlife Conservation Society India program at the National Center for Biological Sciences, Bangalore. He is a pioneer worker in bat echolocation called studies in India. As part of his master's dissertation, he worked on the bats of the Andaman Islands, focusing on genetic structures of subspecies of bats. Currently, he is working on bat turnover along altitudinal gradient in the Western Himalayas. Besides research, he is actively involved in public awareness and conservation programs on bats at various levels. He is also an avid birdwatcher. This topic of today's webinar is bats and COVID-19, facts and fiction. I welcome Rohit Chakraborty. Then Rajesh Puttaswamy, a lawyer by profession. Rajesh is an intrepid explorer, photographer, researcher, and conservationist with keen interest on bats. He is a founder trustee of Bat Conservation India Trust, popularly called BCIT, which is a non-profit organization conceived for the protection of bat species in India by protecting their habitat. He has a mission of dispelling common myths and beliefs about bats and dispelling with scientific data, and has set an excellent example of a citizen scientist. He has traveled to every nooks and corners of the country to satiate his passion for documenting these small mammals during the last 2 decades. His photographs and writings were featured in many prominent natural history magazines like Century Asia, India Birds, etc., and is a fellow member to the International League of Conservation Writers. His topic of today's webinar is need for bat conservation and photography as a tool in research and conservation. Now, I am requesting our respectable director, Dr. Kailash Chandra sir, to deliver his introductory lecture. Sir, please.
Thank you, Dr. Vigday Hegde. First of all, I welcome all the participants and the dignitaries for this webinar on the bats, biases, prejudices, and the conservation reserve, organized by the North Eastern Regional Center, Shillong. And there are two well-known resource persons, Mr. Rohit Chakraborty, who would be speaking on the bats and COVID-19, facts and the fictions. Another, Mr. Rajesh, who is speaking on the conservation and the photography significance. These two topics are very, very relevant during the present scenario of the COVID pandemic, which is going on for last 6 months, and even from our country, I think more than 30,000 people are affected, and more than 60,000 people also died because of this COVID virus. This today's my introductory remark will not be very, very elaborative, but just I want to highlight something about Geological Survey of India, then Northeastern Regional Center, Shillong, and then maybe a few facts which I would like to share about this bats which are all in the myth, and many people have understood that they are the major cause for the COVID pandemic throughout the world. So, in the beginning, first let me share something about Geological Survey of India. Many of the participants may be knowing that this is one of the oldest premier organization in India, working for the study of the entire fauna of our country. And there are 16 regional centers. They are present throughout India, from northeast to the western Gujarat, from the northern region, from the Himachal Pradesh to the Kanyakumari. And they are not only working on the judicial and this political boundaries of the country pertaining to various states and the union territories, but many ecosystems are also being studied by regional centers. Even we have a dedicated regional centers who are studying the fauna of various ecosystems like the freshwater, then the marine, estuarine fauna, then the Himalayan fauna, desert, semi-desert. So like that, one can get the details in JDSI website. All those information are available, and what they have achieved during last more than 100 years of their service to the nation for the study of the biodiversity, at least one component, that is fauna. So, as we have been updating the information, and we also possess the entire database of the fauna of our country, starting from the protozoa to mammalia, and till date, 2,161 species have been recorded from the country, pertaining to all 10 biogeographic zones. WII, Wildlife Institute of India, has already classified into 10 biogeographic zones. Not only the states and union territories, but presently we are also compiling the information from all 10 biogeographic zones, and we'll come to know the each biogeographic zones how many species are having. In the present scenario, after taking up this Himalayan region, then biodiversity are among the 4 biodiversity hot spots in our country. Northeastern region is also one of the biodiversity hotspots, and this Meghalaya or Shillong Regional Center, that is Northeastern Regional Center, Shillong, is present there for last more than 60 years, and they have also surveyed almost all the northeastern states, including Assam, Tripura, Meghalaya, Manipur, and the Mizoram, and lot of information are collected presently. So we have been able to at least find out how many species of the faunal components are present in these states. And in together, if I say, already 18,400 species have been documented from these 60 states of the northeastern states. So this is in the nutshell, I just want to share it. And still there are many gap areas, area-wise as well as the group-wise, which are not available. It means there are many students and the researchers, if they will assess and they analyze the data which we are having in JDSI, they can find out the group where still there is no information, even the state-wise, district-wise, from our northeastern states. Coming back to this northeastern regional centers, they have contributed a lot, and they have been helping to this our local administration, NGOs, and particularly this forest department for the identification of the wildlife seized material. And I'm happy there are several experts in Shillong Center of Geological Survey of India. Some of them are working on the insects, and few of them are working on the fishes. Even one of the scientists is exclusively working on the bats, Dr. Uttam Saikia. So this topic on the bats, which is very, very actually now significant for all of us, entire our human being. I think there are several myths about the actually bats, that they are actually the cause and the major reason for the spread of the coronavirus in the whole world. But that is still not yet actually confirmed. It's all, even the studies are going on throughout the world by the United States and the European region, even in the China also. And China, one of the laboratory is there where they are maintaining the entire all the actually virus restraints. From here it has been told that they have spread from one of the wet market nearby that laboratory which was present in China, and many of the scientists are still working on these bad species, how this has spread to the human being. But still I feel that there is a very less chances of spreading this particular virus from the our wild animals to this our human being. And since there are several species throughout the world, around 1400 species are known throughout the world, of which around 117 species have been recorded only from India, pertaining to 8 families. Dr. Saikia knows all those details. And there are several workers, even Dr. Talmale is there, earlier Dr. Pradhan was there, and he's still in some other institute like Osmania University in Hyderabad. They have been working on the birds, and birds have also been screened for the virus transmission. But in India, at least, COVID-19 has not yet been confirmed that it is present in any of the bird species which have been recorded from the India. So that is one fact which I want to share about you. As far as there is significance of the bird species in our ecosystem is there, there are very actually important component. First, they are the nocturnal species of the mammals. In India, we have 428 species of the mammals, of which the chiropterans as well as the rodents, they represent the maximum diversity. And out of 428 species of the mammal, 117 are belonging to chiropterans. Chiropterans means they are actually the bird species diversity, and they are having a lot of ecosystem services, like they are helping in the pollination, being nocturnal. They are also helping the control of the pest species, particularly this leptopterans and other insects, beetles, because of the nocturnal habitat. Another group like moths, they are also nocturnal. And India, we have 12,000 species. And if you see the population, it's in the millions and billions. So whenever they are there in the nature, if do not control their population, then pest number may increase. And they also have been recorded pollinating more than 500 species of the plants throughout the world. So they have a lot of ecosystem services which they are playing it. They are also very important for health of our ecosystem. And not only the pollination, but they are also helping the dispersal of the seeds from one tree to other places where they have not been recorded. Since most of them are the fruit eater, and some of them also feeding on other insects, small microorganisms. So their use is enormous, and we should never think that they have been causing any impact on the human being and they are spreading the virus. So that is first thing. As far as JDSI is considered, you might have heard the name of Dr. Khajuria. I had an opportunity to work with him in our high altitude regional center during 1991, and he was so passionate work on the birds that even he was continuing his research till night. Sometime he was even staying in the live throughout night, and a watchman who was actually guarding the entire premises will say that I do not know where our sir is there and how much he will be. So that is the interest for the birds. And there is also one story that when he was undertaking the survey in some Middle Eastern country, so he alone has gone to collect the sample of the birds in and those places. That time there was some war was also going on. So some security person, they caught hold of him and they have just taken him into jail. Then he and that is also in the midnight. So that is the passion for our scientists. They have been working. And then when he was he was caught into a study, not jailed, I am sorry. And then later on he was informed to the higher authorities in JDSI. Then he was just released from that custody. So these things are some of our stories who have been working. Dr. Saikia, He's a very good worker on the bats, and he has also written one article about the myth about the bats, why it had been connected with this COVID-19. But it's not only the bat. There are many other species like pangolin. They have also been assessed and screened for this COVID-19 transmitted species. And like that, the studies are still going on. And we should actually not kill all these bats. Even in my office in headquarters, they were just coming for the roosting maybe evening. So some of our colleagues were very much scared. Then they were told it should not be like that, and there is no harm if they are coming to the room and then they are going. So that is the general perception. So this particular webinar on the bats and the biases, prejudices about the myth about the actually that they are spreading the uh, disease, COVID-19 disease. It's not fair, and we should conserve and protect all these species before. Already there are many actually species which population is decreasing throughout the world, and 200 species have been included in various categories. Even two species of the bats they have been included from our country. They are actually the endemic species. Their population is also declining. That's why they have been kept in IUCN category. So this is the sum of the information I just wanted to share, and I just want to inaugurate and wish all the best for the organization that this program should be successful. Thank you, Dr. Hello,
Hello,
Dr.
sir.
Hegde. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for your introductory lecture. Now I am requesting Rohit Chakravarti sir for his lecture on bats and COVID-19, facts and fiction. Rohit sir, please.
Yes, I'm presenting. Share. Okay. Okay. Is that visible to everyone? Let's see. Okay. Okay. So hello, and thanks to the Northeast Regional Center for organizing this webinar, a very timely webinar, because you heard in the introduction, bats are really being demonized all over the world. And this is something that me, Rajesh, all of us have been working together to spread awareness about in India. And today it's my privilege to present this talk in front of you, in front of so many bright people from the Northeast and other parts of the country. So let's begin with this. And let's be honest. I mean, we've never really liked bats. Bats have been the most hated animals in this world, and I don't even remember my own parents telling me ever that bats are wonderful creatures, and you don't need to be scared of them. And one can't really blame them, because they've been getting their own information from the stories like these, like Dracula, and even they've been told by their own elders that bats drink our blood. So there's been a widespread fear of bats even before COVID-19. And this is how we thought about bats even until now, that the moment we see a bat, we need to run away from it. But now, after COVID-19, and when when scientists found that the virus probably originated in bats, there was a lot of garbage on our television channels. So there were these are just a few snippets of what kind of garbage people were fed on our television channels, where I mean, in any case, our news channels should rather be presenting soap operas rather than presenting the news. So these are the kind of horrid demonization that bats had to go through on the TV. And because people were fed such garbage, they reacted in the most in the most brutal ways, in the most unimaginably brutal ways possible. So people in Indonesia, people burnt bats alive, a lot of bats alive, and these were not even bats that were hanging on trees. These were bats that were already caught for food, and they've just burned them alive. In all over the country, there were instances where people cut down trees where bats were roosting. In fact, people even sealed crevices inside which they found these small bats so that the bats could not fly out, and they just, out of hunger, they died inside. And these cases have been happening all over the world, even in developed parts of the country, like even in Germany. I mean, people have been panicking a lot about bats. So that brings us to the question, I mean, what is it about bats? Why are bats always implicated? Why are they the usual suspects when a virus breaks out? And turns out that not all of it is unfounded. I mean, there are a lot of viruses in bats, and there are a lot of viruses in all animals in the world. And but in bats, like this study, which is from the 2000s, which was published earlier this year, sorry, shows that there are 4,100 virus species found in 196 species of bats, and this is just about 12% of the entire diversity of bats in the world. There are more than 1,400 species of bats in the world, and some of these viruses turns out that they're actually quite deadly. For example, filoviruses. This is the family to which the Ebola virus belongs, and paramyxoviruses to which the Nipah virus belongs. And we had a Nipah outbreak 2 years ago in Kerala. So that's fresh in everybody's minds. And then there's also coronaviruses. And you see over here, the blue line, the blue of the pie chart is a huge, I mean, a predominant bulk of the species of viruses found in bats have been found to be coronaviruses. They have a huge diversity in their bodies. And then again, that leads to the question, what makes bats such good viral hosts? And there are a couple of hypotheses that deal with this. Now, the first is called flight as fever hypothesis. And this is very interesting. Like even Dr. Kailash Chandra mentioned in his speech, bats are the only flying mammals. They are the only mammals that are capable of true flight. There are mammals that can glide, but there are none that can fly like bats. And flying is a very expensive process. It's like a heightened form of exercise, which elevates your body temperature. So internally, there's a lot of heat that bats produce when they're flying. And what does that do? That causes a fever-like situation inside the body. And what is a fever? A fever is just your body trying to fight off a foreign particle like a virus, a bacteria, or anything. So by being in flight, bats are in this constant fevered state, which helps them survive viruses. Now, the second hypothesis, which actually has more evidence, is their immune response. Now, I wouldn't say that bats have a very strong immune response or a very strong immune system. They have a very smart immune system. And here's what I mean by that. So imagine this is a virus, or you can also imagine this to be a coronavirus. It looks like one. And when it enters a human body, so not a normal, healthy human body like ours, but for example, an old person, a person who's immunocompromised, when it enters their body, it really makes the immune system work hard. It overworks the immune system. The body tries everything possible to fight off the virus. And as a result, it becomes overloaded. It becomes overworked, and it causes inflammation. It just starts harming the body itself. And that causes death. But when it comes to bats, when this virus enters a bat's body, this is what happens. A bat remains calm. The immune system is super calm, doesn't overreact to the virus. It reacts in a very controlled way. And at the same time, it starts fighting off the viruses. And now this is not an excessive, it's not a very strong fight. This is a fight which only allows the bat to live with the virus. It does not kill the virus. So that's why that's why bats are such good reservoir hosts, which means that they carry viruses, but they don't get affected by them. So, but now there are counter views as well. So earlier on, for a long period of time, people thought that bats are truly special. Bats are the only animals that can, carry viruses and give them off to humans. But turns out that that's not true. I mean, this study was published in a very, very timely manner in the middle of the pandemic, which actually showed that bats are probably not that special. And here's what I mean by that. I mean, so don't bother too much about the graph. I'll break it down for you in the next minute. This is what the study, in summary, mentions. So when we talk about bats, and this is a very common mistake that even that the media always makes. When we talk about bats, we're talking about 1,421 species, which is a huge diversity. Bats are the largest, bats have the most number of species after rodents among all mammals. And in India, bats are actually the most diverse group of mammals. So we're talking about 1,421 species in bats. For comparison, if you take the dog family, the Canidae, these have around 35 species all over the world. So naturally, when you compare 1,421 with species with 35 species, there are bound to be more viruses in 1,421 species just by the numbers, just by the number of species. And for comparison, if you look at an average healthy human being, you have around 100 different species of viruses in any human being, and that's just one species. We're talking about one species, not 1,421 species. So you can imagine that it's all about numbers. There, of course, is a lot of criticism to this paper as well, but this is a very important point to consider when we talk about bats as viral reservoirs. Now let's talk about SARS-CoV-2 itself. So the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19 disease in humans, how did this virus come possibly from a bat into a human lung? So when scientists started studying this, they compared the DNA of the virus, they compared the DNA of different species of bats, and what they found was that a species of bat called the Chinese horseshoe bat, which is actually right here in my hand in Uttarakhand in this photograph. So this bat has a virus which is not the same as the novel coronavirus, but a similar virus, around 96% similar to the novel coronavirus. It went from a bat to a snake, and then in the snake's body, this virus combined with the DNA of the snake, the viral DNA of the snake, and then it became the novel coronavirus that infects human lungs. And this is a pattern that we often see with coronaviruses, because coronaviruses, they have this, they originate in one animal, but they often jump hosts very often. So they jump from one animal to another, then from there to another, or maybe from there to their final target. But as soon as this hypothesis was, as soon as the study came out about snakes being an intermediate host, it met with a lot of criticism. I think the paper was also revoked, but eventually this turned out to be false. And so scientists investigated further, and what they found was something very interesting. Again, the same virus, which is similar to the novel coronavirus, from a Chinese horseshoe bat, went into a pangolin, and from there, it mixed with the viral DNA of the pangolin, became the novel coronavirus, and infected human lungs. Now, this turned out to be pretty plausible, and I'll tell you why. So look at this video. Now, in this short video, what you see is a virus entering the human body. So what is happening here is the yellow part of the virus, the yellow spikes of the virus, those are the receptors, and the receptors work like a key. When they reach the target cell, they open the cell. If they have the right receptors, they can open the cell, go into the cell, and start infecting the target cell. In this case, in the case of COVID-19, it's the human lung. So, but what scientists found was that the bat coronavirus does not have the right receptors to bind to human lungs. And so it cannot directly infect human lungs. It has to go via another animal to get the right receptors. And turns out that pangolins do offer that opportunity. They can help the bat virus get the right receptors to become the novel coronavirus. And when you think about it, it makes even more sense, because pangolins, based on what is happening to pangolins in the world today, pangolins are the most trafficked animals in the world. Tons of them are sold, and mostly to markets in China, so which is where the disease also originated. So this was a very plausible hypothesis, which unfortunately did not stand the test of time. last year in July, in the end of last month in the end of July, a new paper came out which actually says, which now, I mean, let's be clear, we're still not confirming anything. These are studies that are changing the story because this is such a hot topic and everybody is in this rat race to publish. So there are new papers coming out every month. But the latest paper says that the novel coronavirus has actually been circulating in horseshoe bats for the last 40 to 70 years, and it can directly go from bats to humans. And but the question now is that why has it not happened in the last 40 to 70 years? There could be several conspiracy theories and biological theories that can answer that, but that's an interesting point to consider nonetheless. And it also tells us about uh, that maybe we are safe with bats, but given this fact that bats can give the virus directly to humans, are bats dangerous? This is a question that I've been getting from a lot of people, even people who work with wildlife. When they see a bat in their room, they ask me this question. And my counter question to that is, imagine you are stuck in a room or you're stuck in your house. Which of these animals would you share your room with? Now, and I'm sure that all of you chose the bat because there are animals that will most certainly kill you if they're trapped in a room with you. But there are also animals that most probably will not kill you, and bats happen to be those animals. So now that we are clear that bats are not as dangerous as they are portrayed to be, or they are not as dangerous as most other animals can be, let's talk about, let's address this question. Do all bats have the novel coronavirus? No, we're not talking, all 1421 species of bats in the world do not have the novel coronavirus. And the most common bats that you find around your houses, like the pipistrelle over here, that is not a major reservoir of the novel coronavirus. The flying foxes, which actually are the most familiar bats in our country, again, do not have the novel coronavirus. An ICMR study found coronaviruses in these bats, but please be careful. Those are coronaviruses are a large family, and the novel coronavirus is just one species. Most coronaviruses do not even are not even dangerous for humans. Then the short-nosed fruit bat, again a very common species, does not carry the novel coronavirus. But the species that do, they belong to a family called horseshoe bats. And now, what are these horseshoe bats? Horseshoe bats are a group of about 106 species in the world. They're predominantly found in Asia, Africa, and Europe. And what's interesting is that they typically don't live close to human beings. They're typically found in forests and in caves, so they know how to they maintain their distance from humans. And they were also found to be associated with the previous SARS outbreak, in the first SARS outbreak in 2002. So let's look at this map for more perspective. This is a map of different horseshoe bat species in the world from which SARS-like viruses, SARS-like coronaviruses have been isolated. This comes from a 2019 paper. If you look at this part over here, this is pretty interesting, which makes up Southeast Asia Peninsula, Southeast Asia, parts of southern China, and Northeast India, where most of you come from. This is a part of the world which has very high horseshoe bat diversity, and hence a lot of diversity of viruses or a lot of diversity of coronaviruses in that area. But unfortunately, these also happen to be places that are increasingly being converted for plantations, or even our own government is now introducing laws that can really endanger the fragile northeast of India. There's a lot of hunting, particularly of bats, and there's a lot of wildlife trade in this part. These are the main centers, these are the main wildlife markets of the world. So, and these are the factors, exactly these three are factors which scientists have shown are the prime suspects in causing zoonotic disease outbreaks. They change the interface between humans and wildlife to such an extent that diseases go from wildlife to humans, and probably that's why we haven't seen such a coronavirus outbreak in the last 40 to 70 years, because bats knew how to keep their distance and we did not. So that's something that is very, very important to focus, and that's a big point to protest against the kind of activities that are happening in the Northeast today. But having said that, bats have viruses. All animals do. Like I said, an average healthy human being also has 100 different viruses in his body. So we cannot just let go on with life as usual. We need to know how to keep our distance from animals. Even a small tick can give you a deadly virus. So let's be respectful towards animals. Give bats their space. Don't trouble them. Don't kill them. And the most important, do not eat fallen fruits that have bite marks on them. This is the main way in which Nipah virus can get transmitted from bats to humans. And so that's something and the saliva of any animal, I mean, not just bats, the saliva of any animal can give you a virus that can be deadly for you. And it is important to keep away from the feces of bats, and equally important, keep your pets away, because oftentimes what happens is that you do not get a virus directly from a bat, but it goes via an intermediate host. So your pet could act, who knows, your pet could act as an intermediate host and then give you the virus. So these are the three main ways of living with bats. Now, on any ordinary day, on any ordinary topic, I would have stopped my presentation over here. But it's here at this point of time when bats are being demonized, it's not important to stop at just knowing how to live with bats. It's important to spread the word. It's important to educate people about bats. And unfortunately, people need to be reminded that bats actually have the best track record of living with humans. And there's evidence of this all over the world. There are bats in huge numbers in cities, in towns, all along human-dominated habitats. And these are not bats that have been living with you, have come into human habitats because their habitat was destroyed. No, these bats actually do. I mean, the human habitat is also their habitat. And it's important to remember that despite such interfaces, we haven't got any deadly disease from bats in so many years. And that's why my colleagues and I, and Rajesh was also a part of this, we put out a press release to educate the people, to finally bring out the right information in the press about why bats should not be demonized. And there were some wonderful women who motivated me to do this. I mean, there were people who said that, you have to do this, you have to bring out the right information to the press. They motivated me. They checked my press releases because I'm a scientist with no experience of this. And we finally got the word out in English first and then in regional languages. And this also contains an Assamese article written by Dr. Uttam Saikia. And so we reached out to all countries, all parts of the country in as many languages as we could. First in the newspapers, then we tried other forms of outreach. We designed posters with artists. Rajesh went on television, on Kannada television. I was on a popular YouTube channel. We were trying all sorts of ways to get the right message out. We did awareness videos. A lot of NGOs collaborated with us, thankfully, and because they saw that there's a lot to protect over here. Filmmakers, NGOs, everybody collaborated, and this video is actually one of my favorites by Nature Conservation Foundation. It's translated in many different languages, some 7 or 8 different languages. And we also gave it back to celebrities. Because Amitabh Bachchan, in a 140 character tweet, brought down at least 10 to 20 years of bat conservation efforts by just his unnecessary humor. And thankfully, there were people who were educated by our efforts and by themselves who gave it back to him and allowed the media to cover the news in this manner. And a lot of people, I mean, me, Rajesh, we don't get paid to do this. And I get paid to do research. Rajesh does everything out of his passion. And all of us, we were doing this job firstly because we like bats, and secondly because somebody else failed in his or her job. The media failed in their job. the scientists did not bother to tell the media clearly that bats should not be demonized. And that's where we had to step in, because bats are really important for our ecosystem. They are important pollinators. They are important for our economy. For example, in Mexico, where tequila is produced, it comes from a bat pollinated flower. It's a multi-million-dollar industry that bats run. They are the CEOs of this. And same with the durian industry in Southeast Asia, where the durian itself is a bat pollinated flower. This is known to be the king of fruits in the world, not mango as in India, but it's run by bats. And same goes for mangroves. If you live on a coastal part of the country and you've survived a cyclone, you have to thank bats for that, because they help these mangroves flourish. They build a wall on our coast to protect us. And these are only documented records. I mean, I'm only sharing examples that have been backed by science. There are a lot of anecdotal evidence and which need verification. So the actual role of bats may be much greater. There are also insect pest controllers. There are insectivorous bats that devour pest insects, particularly in rice, corn, and coffee, even coffee plantations or cotton plantations. And they're important mosquito repellents. They help you sleep peacefully through the night because they're active at night and they hunt mosquitoes to a great extent. And all of this, all of these last few slides now comes together in this one slide. This is a photograph from Cambodia where you see these structures. These are actually bat houses that villagers have constructed just by putting leaves together. And within these live small insectivorous bats, and they sleep through the day. At night, they go over here where the farmers' fields are. They're predominantly rice fields, and the bats go there. They eat on all the pest insects, so the farmers get free pest control, and the bats come back. They roost over here. Now, when the bats roost over here during the day, they start digesting the food and they start dropping the food over here. So, and bat droppings are very important form of manure. They're excellent fertilizer. So the farmers, just by giving bats a space to live, they get free pest control, they get free manure, everything in the self-sustaining system. And we actually do have cultures that do not demonize bats even in India. There are cultures that worship bats in India, and that's the culture that we need to head towards. And the point of showing you these, sharing the information about campaigning for bats with you was so that you can help spread the word and create this culture where bats are not demonized, because cuteness should never be a measure for conservation. I mean, there are animals that you may not find cute, but that does not mean that they don't have the right to live. And that is what we need to strive to protect. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Rohit Chakraborty. So now this session is open for discussion. So these students may have some questions. So please.
Sure, happily. Either I was very clear. Okay. Finally, your question. I thought I was very clear, or either I was too. I was all over the place. So there's a question. So thanks for that question, Eldon. That's a relevant question. So like I said, there are, like I showed in my presentation, there are two main ways in which bats become good reservoir hosts. One is the flight as fever hypothesis, where flight induces, it puts the bat in a fevered state, so it becomes ready to fight off viruses. And the second is their immune system, which allows viruses, which does not kill viruses, but it allows them to live with those viruses. So that's how bats are not affected by the viruses, but they carry those viruses. Thank you so much for those compliments. Rashmi is typing her question, I think. Information across while arranging a few more sections. Okay. Supriya has a question, and yes, so the virus will be in a living condition in bats, and well, that's how the virus jumps from a bat to another animal. And yeah. Thank you again for the compliment. Okay, Jhuma Paul has a good question. I heard that China had produced an antibiotic for COVID. I actually don't have that information because I haven't been following the news about this. But Russia seems to have come up with a vaccine which is being met with a lot of criticism, and I don't expect to have a vaccine. You know, in the next maybe 2 or 3 months, we should probably have a vaccine. Deep Jyoti Halai, how the bat population in India is affected by climate change? Okay, that's a very good question. We don't know for sure, and because it's something that's quite hard to study. We are not even we have very little data about how different bats about the ecology of different species. So in order to predict how they would be affected by climate change, needs some extra work, and I actually don't know any study that has done it so far in India. So that's something that's open for studying. Okay, Sophia, then the virus must be dividing. Yes, it does reproduce. Yes, it reproduces in different organisms. Kamal Jyoti Chakraborty, what is the distribution of horseshoe bat across Indian subcontinent? Yes, like I said, Northeast has a huge diversity, and Dr. Uttam Saikia is somebody you should definitely contact because he's the person who has the best information about bats in Northeast India. And across India as well, horseshoe bats are found. There are 3 or 4 species found in the Western Ghats, but mostly just one species in most of peninsular India, but Northeast has the highest diversity. Samrat Singh Gupta, how to change people's perception? Like just what I showed you. I mean, there's the way we reached out to people was in a multi-pronged approach. We started with webinars. We sent out a press release. We translated the content to different languages. So this is very important. And all of you, I'm sure, are social media users. So there's still a lot that you can do even within your small circles. And this is exactly what is needed. I mean, there's a saying, if a lot of us do a little, a lot gets done. And that is what we need to target. All of us need to do our little bits in any way possible. Can we look to synthesize COVID antibody in bats? I think you can, and this is a topic of great research because people are studying bat immune systems very with great enthusiasm, because people think that the answer to save ourselves from viruses lies in the bat's immune system, and you should definitely follow the research on that. Prasad Deshpande, thank you. What character of novel coronavirus makes it possible to adjust itself to body conditions of different animals? That's a very good question, and unfortunately I don't have an answer to that because I'm not a virologist. So I have very little knowledge about viruses, but probably I can tell you a little more from the bat side of it. But that is a question that I will note down and I will try to find the answer to. Rashmi Rajgiri, why bats viruses are dangerous, and we know all organisms contain viruses. Okay, so that's a good question, and I don't have the correct answer to that, but here's what I think. Bats and humans, particularly horseshoe bats and some of those forest dwelling bats, And most of these deadly diseases often come from the forest-dwelling bats. Now, these bats don't routinely interact with humans. So, for example, if you're routinely interacting with your pet dog, you even the pet dog has viruses, but you start developing immunity towards the dog's viruses. So animals that you usually interact with, your immune system learns to adjust to their viruses. But bats, forest bats, and humans rarely interact, and mostly it's only bat researchers like us who actually go to forests and catch bats. Not and the other people who do that are bat hunters. So I think because your body is getting introduced to a novel virus, it does not have the immunity to fight it off, and once it gets into humans, it spreads like wildfire because we interact with each other very, very often. Pooja Tushad, you mentioned that bat feces are used as Cambodia. Don't bat feces contain harmful microorganisms? Yes, they do, and you can get fungal infections from repeated exposure to bat feces. But surprisingly, the bat guano industry, guano is the dropping of bats, and there's a huge guano industry particularly in Southeast Asia, where you can see mountains of bat guano in caves, and those are mined in some places in a sustainable way by guano miners. They just wear a mask, they use gloves, and very few of them have actually been infected. So that again means that while we need to be careful of these diseases, they are by no means very common, and different people react differently to different pathogens. Shruti Burrow, why bats carry maximum number of viruses and not bacteria? Okay. Again, like I said, I'm not a virologist or a bacteriologist, so I really can't tell why they have more viruses and bacteria. And I think they probably do have a lot of bacteria. It's just that my talk was focused on viruses. Okay, so that takes care of the questions for now.
Thank you, Rohit Chakraborty. Nice presentation and information you have provided. And even some students have also written, we would like to spread this information to the others also. So that is good. And then you have told about the feces of the bats, though they are used as manures. And then even bat guano, as I know, these are the good habitats for some beetles also. So as I have studied in beetles, this one habitat, so this is a good habitat for beetles also. So anyway, so I thank you very much for your nice presentation. So
thank you so much, and thanks a lot for your questions and the response.
So now I welcome Rajesh Puttaswamaya to deliver his speech on need for bat conservation and photography as a tool in research and conservation. Rajesh Puttaswamaya, please.
Thank you very much, sir. First, I would like to thank ZSI Shillong Division as well as all the staff and senior management of ZSI for giving us this opportunity. I think this is a very pertinent and important topic to discuss at this point of time. And as you know, we all have been facing a lot of challenges in terms of changing the perception of people towards bat. And I guess this session should definitely educate a lot of our friends in the Northeast region and rest of India, and hope we'll be able to kind of bring in value to all of you and for the time that you spend. I know Rohit kind of addressed a lot of questions. I think he's given a fundamental information, talked a lot about virus. My topic is going to be slightly different, where I'm going to touch on what work we have been doing from BCET and how can we use photography as a tool for carrying out research and conservation. Because in terms of any research or even conservation action, some of these tools play an important role and pivotal role in helping us understand better. So I'll just share my slide. Just give me a second. Can you all see the slide now? Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. See, I think first of all, like, I mean, I know we have already discussed this, and Mr. Kailash and the staff member also mentioned the importance of bats. But I just want to kind of give you a brief, quick overview and run through a couple of points here. Why do we need to conserve bats? I think bats play an important role in our ecosystem, which has hardly been understood. I mean, if you talk to any common man or even some other people in the forest department or on the policy, many of them don't even know what the value of bats are in our ecosystem. Probably very few of them know. And if you talk about how many of them even have seen bats or how many species have they seen, I think that's very limited. As Rohit also mentioned, most of fruit bats help in regeneration of forest by dispersing seeds. They also help in pollination of various commercial crops. Plus, they help in pest control. They're one of the best pest control either in terms of mosquitoes or moths or other insects. We have classic examples of few species of bat predating on diverse insect species, not necessarily just a handful, but kind of diverse insects as well. Similarly, we have few bats like the Megaderma, which is now called as Lyroderma or Lyra, also feeds on small mammals as well as birds. So as a whole, bats are one of the important stakeholders in our wildlife in the mammal section, and they occupy almost about 28% of the mammalian species in India. So it's very vital for us to kind of understand more about them and see what role they play in each of the ecosystem, each of the habitat they harbor. Um, Mr. Kailash also mentioned about the India has about 128 species. I mean, of the 428 species of mammals, 128 of them are bats. How many of us really knew about this, right? Probably hardly few of us. Maybe if we are asked to name, maybe we could name about 4 or 5 species, or we could have seen only 4 or 5 species so far. But not many of us are aware about India hosting 128 species of bats. And this is just the beginning. I think we are yet to make more inroads and understand more about bats. But I think we have a very diverse diversity of bats with different family occupying different family and genre. So just giving a few glimpses of photograph of various species of bats so that you can get a perspective of how different they look at different families, different structures. We all hear about bats, not a good-looking creature or cute-looking creatures, right? But if you look at these photographs, you can really appreciate they're quite diverse. They have a different dynamic structure. They've uh, developed. They have a unique systems which they've developed. Each of them have their own uniqueness and looks. So I think it's very important for us to document. One simple question I would like to ask is, how do we protect a species which if we don't even know how they look like, right? So it's very important for us to have a good photograph of a species so that we know how it look like. At least there's no emotional connect if you're not seeing a species. You can't talk to the policymakers. You can't talk to people to garner support. Only when you see things, when you feel, you have that connect, you build that connect. So it's important. Photograph really play an important role. Even photograph or sketch or even videos. All these act as a very important tool in terms of bringing that emotional touch to people, where they can feel, okay, I've seen it, I know, I understand now, I can probably relate better, and then take corrective actions. So that's why I think photography is a very important aspect of it. Now, while we are touched on like broader diversity, bats are one of the least studied species in India, and probably we have hardly maybe less than 100 people studying bats in India compared to other mammals, is what I would say. In fact, recent approach with press release, we could probably reach out only about 60, 70 people in India and Southeast Asia, or South Asia basically. If we even look at people probably we might have missed contacting, should not cross more than 100. So that tells us how much information we are yet to collect, and there's a lot more study that is need to be done. And the recent reports, I would say in the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years, have given us a lot of insight into how there have been new discoveries, what has been coming out. For example, there has been new species, two new species, two new spat discovered in Meghalaya. I think this was in the late, somewhere in 2012. There are new distribution records of various species. For example, the Hippoceras durgadasi, which was earlier known to be existing only in the Jabalpur area, was now discovered to be present near Bangalore in a place called Kolar, along with the highly endangered, critically endangered Kolar leaf nose bat. In our own assessment, where me and Rohit have been surveying across the Bangalore region in the last couple of years, we have come across many other species where we have got the record of different occurrence of species. For example, Cantus, we have seen in Ramnagar area, we have seen Tadaridaga species in near Ramnagar. So a lot of new inserts are still coming up. I think if we channelize our focus and we have more people studying bats, I'm sure probably in the next 5 years we'll probably be discovering many more species of bats. Um, so I think, especially Northeast is what I believe is a kind of treasure trove. It's a treasure that needs to be unearthed. It's something that's not really been touched upon much, or very least study has happened. So I think you have a sorry about the sound. So you have a great opportunity to work with Dr. Uttam Saikia to study these bats in the Northeast region and help us unearth more species. So, what does photography help in? I'm sorry, just give me a minute. Looks like there's too much of noise here. Sorry about that. There's a construction going on nearby. Yeah. So, photography can really help a lot in terms of telling stories. For example, with the recent pandemic itself, we have on all our news release, we've been able to kind of reach much larger audience and then communicate more to the people. For example, this is just a snapshot of the article that was published in in an online portal called Nature in Focus, which really helped us garner more support and then spread the message. It also all these photograph, especially the predictive picture, right? I mean, most photos probably would have seen earlier where by researchers, scientists, where these bats were handled. And unfortunately, those pictures may not give the kind of emotional or the awe feel for an audience. So if you have a picture that kind of looks attractive, where you can showcase bats as colorful as any other birds or other mammals, I think that plays an important role in bringing the right attention for people. So one of my main objective has been to kind of create that mindset change in people and change the perception of people that bats are not ugly and bats are not colorful. So because most people think they're drab, they're not good looking. So if we can capture bats with different perspectives, different angle, with the right colors, I think we can really show the difference and show the diversity that we have. Similarly, not many know where do bats live, how do they live. Much of the ecology is least studied, especially the cave ecosystem. I think cave ecosystem in India is probably one of the least studied ecosystems, I would say. Very few people are working in the cave ecosystem, whereas some work has been done. For example, this image is from one of the Western Ghats, the cave found in Western Ghats region, Northwestern Ghats region, which harbors almost about probably a million species of Miniopterus bat, and it hosts around 11 species of bats in this one massive cave. So there are so many such things that needs to be identified and researched upon and supported. Similarly, we have bats roosting in tree holes or under the bark of trees. Again, these are some of the probably the least photographed, I would say, because you don't see them unless until you capture them with mistnet or hard trap, and are very difficult to photograph as well. Whereas the cave-dwelling bats or the bats which live in tree open on the trees are much easier to photograph. So especially the respirator family, the like pipistrelles and all, on the tube-nosed bats which don't roost in open, are something that has never been documented, and it's very difficult to kind of make people understand what these bats are, how they look like. Similarly, we have, I know bats are also one of the most adaptable mammals, I would say. Wherever they've been dispersed from their natural roosts, like caves and other things, they have occupied ruins, and old temples, and they've made them as a secondary home. So it's very important for us to protect these homes as well. And this image was photographed in Golconda in Hyderabad, where the Archaeological Survey of India initially tried to kind of drive away these bats and had smoked out. But thanks to the efforts of Dr. Srinivas Lu and team and other researchers, where they have now demarcated some portion of this fort specifically for bats, and they're not being disturbed. So we have about 10,000 Rosetta's bats here living in Golconda Fort. So it's important to protect these kind of ruins and old monuments as well. I know if I think some of you might have coming from the birding background, where it's much easier to identify a bird or a butterfly by looking at a photograph, but identifying bats through photograph is not that easy. I mean, I literally had a lot of challenges when I started understanding about bats and trying to kind of identify species. I think, thankfully, I think Mr. Shamar, Dr. Shamar Tilbale is there in the call. So he's first, probably one of the first scientists I reached out to in ZSI to help me identification of bat. And he was very forthcoming and gave a lot of inputs in terms of how we can do. And he was also initially challenging that, bats are very difficult to identify by looking photograph, because it's most of the identification keys are not visible. We need measurement. But coming from a birding background, and again, not being a scientist, I was apprehensive about capturing any bats or any animal for that matter. So I asked him, like, is there a better way that we can still do? Can I get you a good photograph? I have a better long lens. Maybe I can take a picture of certain angle, or I can take picture of this perspective. Would that help? And he was very supportive, and he gave me a couple of inputs. I went back to those caves, places where I'd seen these bats, took better pictures which could give clarity. So, for example, if you see here, this is the photograph of horseshoe bat. It's a Rhinophorus bedomi. It's a woolly horseshoe bat. So while this bat is quite easy to distinguish, but there are many other bats which, especially in the Hippoceras family, the Rhinophorus family, may not be easy to identify with photograph. But if we spend decent amount of time and ensure the photograph are taken in the appropriate manner, which gives clear demarcation or clear visibility in terms of the identification keys, I think then most cave dwelling bats is possible to be identified. I won't say 100%, but at least with 90% accuracy, we should be able to identify bats. I think that's in the last 5-6 years I've been photographing extensively. I think I can confidently say that now. While initially there were quite a lot of doubts, but if you're able to get clear front fascia of the face, as well as the side profile of the face, and also the wing, open wing structure, then it's easy to identify most of the key identification keys in certain species. So I'll just highlight a few here. With the metacarpal bone, the length of the metacarpal bone also plays an important role in identification of certain species. Similarly, this distinction of Cantor's leaf-nosed bat versus Snyder's leaf-nosed bat. One of the key difference is the supplementary leaflet here, whereas in Cantor's there are only 2 supplementary leaflets. In Snyder's there are 3 supplementary leaflets. So these are one of the identification key. Of course, apart from this, there is a length of the metacarpal bone, whether 3rd, 4th, 5th, which is longest, which is shortest, which supersedes the other. I think all this also matters. But again, as I said, with good photograph, we should be able to kind of identify. This image gives a difference in terms of how the lesser false swarm per bat versus the larger or greater false swarm per bat look like. And again, with good pictures, we should be able to distinguish them easily. So while these photographs also help in identification and as well as telling stories, they are also an important factor in capturing various behaviors of bats, right? So especially when we're carrying out research, a lot of behavior needs to be kind of addressed and then documented. Other than addressing in the literature, we also need to ensure these bats are documented. We have enough evidences of various behaviors of bats. So how do we maintain that? So it's important that while carrying out any research in the field, we should try and take photograph of all the behaviors that we have observed or all the uniqueness that we have observed of a species. For example, this image is of a short-nosed fruit bat, which converts the prod of a Carota urens, which is called fishtail palm tree, into a kind of tent-like structure. So we call this fondly as a tent-making bat in India because either the palm leaves or the palm prods, they chew it, then kind of create an open space in the center of the structure to create like a tent-like structure, and then they are later occupied by the male along with its harem. So this acts as their home for a couple of months till the prod withers away. Then they try and make one more room in one more tent with some other tree or nearby tree. So they keep moving their shelters, they keep moving their homes, and then keep building fresh tents every now and then. Wish we could do that as well, right? Similarly, there are a lot of behaviors which are not been documented. As I said, I think even with Rohit acknowledged, a lot of behavioral and ecological aspects have not been documented much. There are very few papers in India which highlight these behaviors and where it's been documented. I think even like the breeding behavior has not been documented. For example, this is a image of a behavior that I observed in one of the cave near Ramnagar, where this is a species of a lesser mostile bat, where you saw the male kind of fanning its wings and trying to kind of attract and corner this female and was not letting any other males nearby. So it's a kind of courtship behavior demonstrated by the lesser mostile bat. One of the challenge with studying bats is also the light, right? We don't have ambient light in a cave ecosystem. You have to use either the torch light or use an infrared camera and then try and manage. Many times they might get disturbed, but if you spend significant time, they get adjusted to human beings. And if you start with a dim light and then kind of increase the intensity, the bats do get registered and you can still observe them in their natural environment. In the same cave, we also saw a difference. For example, bats also have their own niche and they have their own, some of them are quite territorial as well. In the same cave where we saw on the one side of the roof, the lesser mostile bat had occupied the uh, place, and the other side we have the Snyder's leaf-nosed bat, Hipparchus spurus. So they would not mix. They would always try to kind of hold their fort. They hold their area and were being very territorial and would chase away the other intruders. So they had their own space, though they stayed in the same cave. Similarly, this is an image of a Rosatus Leschinalti photograph in Madurai. You can see all the yellow markings are basically urine markings. Some of these are also territorial and they want to kind of come back to the same spot and then roost in the same spot. Very rarely would they move and mix with others, but they try and roost in the same spot all the time. However, that's not true in all the cases. For example, this photograph depicts where we have Miniopterus plus Rhinophus lepidus roosting together. In fact, they are huddling together as well. So there's no competition for space here, and they're demonstrating a unique behavior of being together, creating that warmth among themselves, and not really fighting for spaces. This is an image again of the same Rhinophus ruxi. They're all huddling together just to kind of create that warmth in a cave environment. And you can see these kind of close-knit group or huddling in most of the caves where bats roost in large numbers. This is about panting. Most fruit bats, sometimes when the humidity is quite high in the outside and depending on the cave or the roost they're in, they can be seen panting and trying to kind of regulate their body temperature to remain, keep their body temperature under control. So these are some of the various behaviors that can be documented using photograph, which otherwise it's very difficult to tell a story without good photographs. So again, these are the images of a newborn pup. You can see how the pup is hanging. It's usually when they're born, the head is upside and not downside. Only when they turn around when they're feeding, when they need to kind of suckle. But in a normal hanging posture, usually the head of the pup is always facing upside, unlike the normal bat which hang upside down. So similarly, these pups cling on to the mother till they're slightly big enough, and the mother is not able to carry them any further. Where their pups are usually left back in the cave, and then mothers venture out, feed, and come back, and then feed their pups. So there are various behaviors that can be documented and kind of needs to be told to people. So this is a flight training practice. We'll say, the pups hang on to the mother, and then just like how birds try and fly in their, especially the raptors, I would say, try and beat their wings and try and learn the flight process. The young bats also do it. They practice, and then they try and fly a short distance before they take a bigger leap, and then they come back. Sometimes if they're lost, the mothers go and pick the pup back, and they return back to the main roost. So while we have understood the diversities and the other challenges and the importance of bats, there are a lot of conservation issues affecting the production of bats. There are different aspects where bats are being decimated. For example, habitat destruction is one of the key, especially in the southern India, as well, plus I think East Coast, or say Eastern Ghats area, where we have these rocky outcrops. Uh, the government feels that these are not, I mean, most of it is what they call as Karabland or wasteland, not necessarily. So only forest is given prominence in India, and couple of other plantations or maybe even mangroves get some kind of attention, but not as much as other places. So if it's not a forest, then it's a wasteland, it can be converted. If it's a grassland, it can be converted into plantation land. So that's the unfortunate myth that we have in our policymakers, with the policymakers. So lot of hilly terrain in southern India has gone under the hammer of mining companies and granite quarrying. So, for example, this image is some where we had documented a couple of years back, where me and Rohit used to frequent for observing the cave, and we had four species of bats in this hill. But now, because of this quarrying, the hill is almost completely gone, and we have lost four species from this particular spot, which means the four species of bat we had found in this cave and in this hill now are gone locally extinct. So this is how the destruction happens, because the government doesn't know that there are bats roosting in this area, and they probably only look at whether there are tigers, leopards, or elephants, or bears, big mammals roaming here. And if there's no big mammals, the big fauna, or no specific endemic flora, then they are not bothered about giving any permission. So permission to such quarrying is very easy in a non-protected area. So many of such hillocks around Bangalore and southern India have really been destructed without any proper planning. Fortunately, things are changing. Similarly, we have hunting. A lot of hunting keeps happening either for medicinal properties or as food. So this is one of the net fishing net that we used to capture the cave nectar bats in Western Ghats. And we brought it up to the attention of the forest department. They immediately took action, and now the cave and the nearby habitat is under control of the forest department, and there's a proper monitoring. Similarly, we have extensive hunting of bats in the northeast, especially in Nagaland and Arunachal, where bats are consumed as a ritual every year. Especially in Nagaland, there's a community called Bomar Clan, where they basically are in the Pungro region. So every year during October season, they harvest these bats. There's a huge cave which used to host almost about 60,000 bats, but now in the last 5 years, where we've been in touch with the community and then we've been documenting, the number of bats have come down to almost 2,000. So the number of bats harvested per year has come down to as less as 2,000 bats. So unfortunately, we have not been successful in a conservation action in this region. One, primarily, there is a cultural significance here, and the bats being hunted are the fruit bats, which is classified as vermin in our Wildlife Protection Act. So, which is a sad reality. So, the forest department nor the government can take any legal action on the tribe because they are anyway classified as vermin. Secondly, the community believes unless until they harvest these bats, they would not be accepted by their ancestors in heaven. So there's a significant cultural angle to this as well. So convincing them to give up hasn't really been successful so far. Though we have been giving them alternate options, other livelihood or other means of meat consumption, we are unfortunate that it's not really been successful. So we feel some of them have been more money-minded or greedy, and we are expecting that we pump in money every year, which is not a sustainable measure to stop hunting. So that's been a challenge. But I think it takes certain generation in such places, especially in Northeast where bushmeat is pretty common, that we need to, it takes time to kind of change the mindset of people. I think only with the newer generation, only with extensive awareness programs and education, would we be able to kind of change that mindset of people there. This is again one of the photos from the same harvest. So other than hunting, other challenge that we face with conservation of bats is renovation of man-made structures, whether it's temples or whether it's ruins. Crores of rupees is spent by the government to kind of chase out these bats from the monuments or the caves, or sorry, monuments or the temples where these bats are roosting, and they're either sprayed with chemicals or burned down and then chased out from their secondary home, which means they probably go extinct in those regions as well. So it's very important we work back with the Archaeological Survey of India, define a protocol so that we demarcate some area as for bats while retain the monument. So it's highly important for all of us to speak on behalf of bats and then bring the stakeholders under our support to make them understand that it's much more important for us to protect and conserve our natural heritage than a man-made heritage. Sadly, I think the policymakers give more importance to the man-made heritage than the natural heritage. I think that mindset has to change, and we really need to kind of drive more aggressive messaging to the government bodies to kind of change that. So yeah, I think this was about 2018 when there was a lot of action was being planned in Delhi for the renovation. Fortunately, we worked back with our friend Sumit Dokia in Indraprastha University, and then worked back with Archaeological Survey of India and the Delhi Forest Department. We were able to kind of control decimation of bats by the Archaeological Survey, and fortunately, we had some success in that. But I think broadly, we need to work on a policy to have that implemented with Archaeological Survey across India. So with that, I just come to an end of my presentation. I'll just take a pause. I hope I was not too fast.
Thank you very much, Rajesh Puttaswamy. So now the session is open for discussion. So students, if you have any questions, you please put it in chat so that Rajesh Puttaswamy will answer your problems.
Not many questions coming through. Okay, there's a question from Prerna. It says, is it true that a mother bat abandoned their young ones? If yes, why? No, so I don't think this is I mean, this is basically a myth. This is not true. Mother bats don't really abandon young ones. In fact, most mother bats will definitely come for to pick up the baby bats if they're dropped off. We had many instances where some of my friends working in the rescue and rehabilitation of bats, where they've left the pup back to the same place where they found. Either we advise them to leave the bat hanging on a small twig or a towel if it's found fallen down. Then usually with the distress call of the pups, mothers come back and pick it up. And most of the situations, mothers come back and pick up the pup within few minutes of them being released. So yes, I think that's a good thing that mothers come back, and it's a myth that they don't abandon. There's a question from Rashmi. How to acquire course in this field if you are from engineering background? Okay, so I think this is a very important question, especially for me. As Sarpa introduced in the beginning, I'm basically a lawyer by profession, and all my science learning has been through interaction with people like Rohit, Shamat sir, and Uttam sir. I mean, if you have the passion, you don't need to be worried about what background you come in. I mean, your passion should drive it. All you need to do is just read as much as possible, interact, exchange information with like-minded folks, work in collaboration with conservationists and researchers. You'll be able to learn. So you don't need to specifically attend any course, but obviously, I think if you're keen to take up any course, either a master's or a bachelor's, there are many universities in India which are now offering wildlife courses for again people with not necessarily from a science background, but even if you're from engineering background, you can definitely take it up. NCBS is one. I think there are a couple of more universities. There's one in Kerala. I'm sorry, I'm not able to recollect which university, but I think there are multiple universities across India now which offer wildlife related course which can pick up. But if you just want to work on bats, you can contact any of the bat researchers. I'm sure everyone would be happy to it. And I would be happy to kind of support in whatever way possible from BCIT perspective. Okay, there's one more question from Supriya. I think in the places where the bats are being killed, illiteracy is more, so education is the only way through which we can convince them about importance of bat. Okay, this is an important question. I won't say illiteracy is the only reason where we're having these challenges. In fact, this whole COVID-19 myth and the negative press release that came, we had many instances of bats being decimated or the trees or the roofs being destroyed coming from an urban area. Like in Bangalore, we had at least 3 or 4 incidents in Bangalore. I think there are a couple of incidents in Delhi and other places as well where you have educated people. I think education and literacy is not really his measure of common sense, I would say. Of course, we had some concerns raised from the rural side as well. I got a lot of calls from the rural side. In fact, some of the forest department also called. But with just simple messaging and sharing 1 or 2 videos with the villagers who probably are considered as illiterate, have really helped us change their mindset. I think it's just a common sense of people matters more than the literacy is what I believe. There's one more question from Samrap Sengupta. For the urban dwelling fruit bats, what criteria they look when choosing roosting site? Again, interesting question. So, Cyanoptera spinix is one of the urban dwelling, and as well as Pteropus medius, which is one of the largest fruit bat in India. These are found predominantly within close to human proximity, and mainly they look at safety, place where they can roost, and also the availability of food source. So one of the urban common was Cyanoptera spinix, which I said. I think they primarily feed on either the fig trees, fig fruits, or what we call as Singapore cherry or the Jamaican cherry, which is used predominantly in almost all the urban environment. This one question from Dr. Namran. How is the circadian rhythm of this bat? Thus, it differs with the species. I'm not sure if I'm competent enough to answer this, but I think there are a lot of different characters which differs from bats or other mammals, and they're uniquely built. Whether it's anatomy, where I mean, their ability to kind of hang upside down without impacting their heart, and also in terms of their ability to fly it, I think there is quite a distinction. Maybe Rohit can throw more light on this circadian rhythm aspect. Rohit, you want to pitch in here?
Sorry, I missed what you were talking about.
Yeah, so there's a
what-
question. There's a question from Dr. Namran which says, "How is the circadian rhythm of this bat?
Okay.
Does it differ with the species?"
Okay. Of any particular species? Oh, okay. Does it differ with species?
Differ with species, yes.
Well, it's hard to answer that because we really haven't. I mean, most of the species that we've observed at different times of the day. I think cave roosting bats, because there's so many of them roosting in one place, they keep shifting their positions a lot. So even though they're supposed to be sleeping at that time, they are actually quite active.
Correct.
But on the other hand, uh, bats like pipistrelles and foliage roosting bats that are often uh, that live in crevices or in under leaves or in tree holes, they have a much better sleep because there are fewer of them. So I think it's only in terms of circadian rhythms, yes, um, the fact is that during the day they sleep, at night they are active, but the amount of sleep that they have, different species of bats have, I think that differs from species to species.
Yeah, that's true. So thanks, Rohit. In fact, we have observed bats to be quite active, especially the cave-dwelling bats to be active even during daytime. In my own observation, what I've seen is once they come into the cave in the early morning, between around 3 to 6 o'clock, and then settle down, maybe in an hour, they kind of settle down, then just go into sleep. So till probably about afternoon, early afternoon, they're quite inactive and then trying to rest. But I think by afternoon they're always trying to kind of warm up. Sometimes they make short flights within the cave and then kind of warm up and then come back and then sleep. So again by evening 4 o'clock they're again completely active. They start coming close to the entrance of the cave and then start playing out. At least an hour or two before the leave the cave, they're very much active. So again differs from species to species, but yeah, there's no long sleep. And also depends on, I think, the location. For example, Western Ghats, depending on the monsoon and sometimes in winter, we have seen some kind of torpidity as well, where they go into slight hibernation. So you can literally go and touch the bats, and they're not disturbed. So again, depends on location to location.
And
I hope that answers the question.
sorry, and
Yeah, Rohit?
just
Yeah.
one short point to add to that. The seasonal activity also differs from place to place. Like, for example, the breeding seasons differ say Uttarakhand versus Western Ghats, and because bats hibernate, they actually hibernate for 3 full months in Uttarakhand.
Yeah. Thanks, Rohit. Yeah. There's another question called from Anjali, which says, which camera is best for photography? Okay, so any camera is best for photography. Depends on how well you're able to kind of take the photograph. Some of the times you have this point and shoot. Now with Canon, Nikon handled small lightweight cameras, which has a good zoom, optical zoom, is also good enough for you to take photograph. The challenge is in a cave, if especially you're trying to photograph in a cave, then you might need supplementary light like as a torch, which is not too illuminated, but gives you enough light to focus on the bat and then you can take a picture. Yeah, but most basic DSLRs with a simple telephoto lens should be able to help you get good pictures. There's a question from Divisional Forest Officer. In what way we can protect the habitat of the free-tailed bats available in one of the caves in the Interior Hills District? Okay, so this is a very good question, and happy to hear this from your side, sir. So I think one of the important action that you can take as part of your management plan that you should include is, first of all, restrict the access to the cave from people. I mean, unless it's the tribals who really are been living having access to the caves on a continuous basis, I think you should restrict to all other people. And if there's any practice of collecting gono, then you need to restrict the collection of gono to certain period of the year and only set a number of people to enter the cave. So I think that would be the first and foremost, because the more entry in and out of the cave will create more disturbance for the bats. That needs to be regulated significantly. And unnecessary tourism should definitely be stopped, and only for education purposes and limited. Again, depending on the season, I think breeding season is something where you should stop people entering the cave, because we have seen practically in some cases where unknowingly we would have disturbed, because if the bats get into panic and they're pregnant, sometimes they have a miscarriage as well. I had one instance of such. I'm not sure if that is the reason, but I've seen an young pup or an unborn pup falling down. So it's very important that we monitor this timing of the breeding season and ensure no one enters the cave during breeding season, and regulate the number of people entering it. I hope that answers. There's another question from Ursula. Sir, there are some people who eat bat as there is a traditional belief that it is good for children bedwetting. I think this is purely a myth. I don't think there's any scientific evidence to it. We hear different stories in different parts of India on these issues, but I think it's more of an educational issue. We have to educate people and then make them understand this is not really a fact, and there's no scientific backing for it. Another question from Srinivas Uppar. So many people are having misbelief about bats. People are cutting the trees where the bats are found more. They're destroying their habitat. True, I think this has been very common and more predominant after this coronavirus outbreak. We've been hearing stories from all walks of life and across India. I think again it's important that we educate people. We had some success stories. Of course, we had some instances where we're not been so successful, especially in the urban environment. People say living in apartment or living in close proximity to bats, they are always fearful that they might get Nipah virus or a coronavirus and they want to destroy the trees and then to roast. I think we just had to talk to the people, make them understand it is the same tree which is giving them the required oxygen and required shade for their cars or for their people to play around, and important for them to kind of protect those trees rather than, I think all they need to do is just not walk under the tree so that they're not what do you call bombarded with poop and pee, and there's no other way of them getting infection. So as long as they maintain the premises clean, I think they should not be worried about it. Okay, thanks for the compliments. There's another question from Betzelo. Can I suggest any books for identifying bats? Yes, there are few books, but unfortunately, in India, we don't have many books for bats. But I think one of the easy way and to start with is the bats of the book in Indian mammals. I think by Vivek Menon. I guess it's a kind of field guide, the Book of Mammals of India. So that could be a good one. There's another book called Bats of Indian Subcontinent, published by Harrison Institute of UK, which normally is not available online, but you can check on Amazon. And sometimes, even if you just submit a request, if there are enough prints, they'll notify you, and then you can probably procure that. So that's probably the only book that we have which has extensive information about bats in India. And I know a couple of my friends are working on their own books for the bats found in India. Hopefully, in the next couple of years, we should have some more literature about bats in India. This question from Rashmi, it says, did you face any bad situation while photographing bat? If so, how did you overcome? Okay, good one. So the bad situation. So what is bad here? I think that's a broader point. I think one of the things that we need to be mindful is, especially if you're studying bats in a cave environment, one of the first and foremost challenge that most of us would feel is the smell of guano. For some people, it's a kind of no starter. People can't even come close to the cave because of the smell of the guano. Initial days, I used to be a big migraine patient, and I used to puke the moment I get smell. But I overcome that. Now I don't have this challenge. So that's one of the challenge. Again, in a cave, you probably are unaware because it's a dark environment. You might have snakes lurking in the dark environment. I need to be mindful about where you're stepping, where you're walking, where you're crawling in, so that there are no snakes which could probably bite you accidentally. There are cases where, especially in southern part India, caves, most of the caves are also used by bears and other predators. So you need to really be mindful when you're entering. You need to check so there's no predators inside, and take precautions before entering the caves. Fortunately, I don't think I had any major incidents. Yes, there is one instance where I was probably more positive about my own capability. I got down into a small cave. I had to get down, and since I was trained in rock climbing, I thought I could probably climb back, but I literally got stuck, couldn't really climb back, but managed to find some small opening and slid that out. Yeah, so those are some things that we need to be mindful and not really be too adventurous, I would say. Ticks are a major challenge. I think that's been one of my biggest problem. Getting bitten by hundreds of ticks all over the body is something I really hate experience. There's another question. In some regions, it's believed that the bats are eaten to treat asthma. Does bat provide us any medicinal value? No, I think this is again a myth. Just like any other birds, some of the birds also being captured and eaten for similar threat. There is a belief even across India where they think if bats are consumed, health issues like asthma and then a stroke and then kids getting anemic, all this can be cured. But I think this is just a myth. There's no medicinal value or there's no proof on that factor. There's one question from Girish. Bats are living in huge numbers in habitat. Do they have social organizations? Yes, there are, depending on species, bats roost in huge colonies. So we call them as colonies or some schools. They do have, I mean, again, differs from species to species. They have their own, what do you call, characters, behaviors. Some are very territorial. They stick to their own niche. Some prefer certain kind of temperature, ambient temperature in the cave. They try and do that. In some species, there is a separate maternal colony. All the males hang around separately, while the females hang around separately. There are in some situations, especially I think most tail bats, you have the all the young ones and pups living in a separate colony, and the females and males living in a separate colony. So there is various changes. Obviously, I think all these behavioral and ecological aspects as being studied in India. I think that's where probably you guys can play an important role by taking up bats as one of the subject for your study. So a lot more to be studied, lot more to be unearthed. I think there's a huge potential to study bats in India. Abhiranjan, there's a question from Abhiranjan says, what are the natural reasons for shifting roosting sites of mega bat? I think mega bats predominantly stick to the same roost for year on year. I mean, we have various examples where the villagers say these mega bats have been roosting there for hundreds of years. The primary reason for them to change the roost could be the trees being chopped down, or there is significant disturbance either by fire or hunting, and I think that would be the primary reason why they would shift roost, or else they'll probably prefer to stick to the same trees. Another question, Pooja sir, will you tell me about their behavior you face during photography? I mean, are they aggressive or show something defense mechanism? No, I don't think I've come across any instance where the bats have been aggressive towards me. It's just that they're wary and then they're probably disturb more of another big mammal entering their cave or getting close to the roost. They might try and fly out into the crevices where they're not seen, but I don't think there's been any instance where they have attacked me or even shown any other such form of aggression. So, in fact, they're more scared about us than anybody. So, never worry about bats biting us. I think even the remotest possible will never be bitten unless we handle them. I don't think there's any chance of any risk with bats. Yeah, so we have sometimes bats when they fly around in panic, they bombard with poop and pee. Sometimes we might think that they are doing this as a way of shooing away. I'm not sure if that is true, but yes, it's possible. There's one instance where I can probably give an example. In Ramnagar, there's a black bear tomb bat. This is only one instance. So I don't know if that's true or if it's a fluke. Yes, we did face some bats, small pellets of stones were falling down on us continuously, and we saw a few bats moving into crevice, coming out, and at the same time the small stones were falling down. I don't know if that was a their trick or they're trying to kind of chase away, or it was just a coincidence of them being panicky and then moving in and out. Okay, so there's a few compliments. Thank you. Okay, one more question from Sripad. What are the best parameters to study bats in cave ecosystems? Okay, parameters in the sense there are multiple aspects that can be studied. Again, we don't know much about the ecology. So depending on which part of India you're looking at, we need to probably identify different species. Then it could be cave ecology itself, whether how many species it harbors, or whether they maintain certain kind of niche area, whether it's kind of again maternal, paternal, or male-female combination that can be checked, or migration is something that's never been studied in India, bat migration. I've seen bats occupying certain caves in certain season and not occupying the cave in certain season of the year. So there's a huge lacuna in terms of understanding of bat migration in India. So that's something that can definitely be looked into. I think we now have certain GPS devices which can be used on slightly medium sized or larger bats. I think that's something can be picked up by you guys if you're interested. So who knows, there might be migration of bat from Western Ghats to the Eastern Ghats, or there could be migration from the plains to the mountains. We're not sure. For example, the Nagaland project that we're working on, we know they congregate more during monsoon. So if the bats are using the cave routes during monsoon and congregate there, where do they go in summer? Where do they go in winter? So are they going to the plains? Are they going to the other area? Or are they migrating to the Southeast Asia? Or are they coming to the central part of India? We don't know. So I think that's something that can probably be studied. Okay, I think we covered most of the questions. I hope it was insightful, and hope we were able to kind of bring in some insight into you guys. And thanks a lot for the time, and greatly appreciate you guys participating. Any more questions? We're happy to share. I can share my contact details as well.
Thank you, Rajesh sir. Can you hear, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. Out of curiosity, I also want to ask one question. When Dr.
Sure,
Dharma has asked about circadian rhythm, in all other animals, actually melatonin secretion, the hormone secretion, usually it is more during the evening. So since bats are nocturnal animals and they are active during evening, whether it is reverse, so that is my interest.
I think so.
I'm not too sure. Yeah, Rohit, you want to pick it up?
Yeah, I think so, because and I think that would be the case for all nocturnal animals. The sleep cycles and the hormones that govern sleep would work in the exact opposite way as to diurnal animals. But I mean, I need to confirm that. This is my hunch.
Okay, we can have the discussion later on also.
Sure.
So now we have come to the end of this webinar. So today and now it is my pleasure to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of Northeastern Regional Center of Zoological Survey of India, Shillong, I extend a hearty vote of thanks to the Honorable Director, ZSI, Dr. Kailash Chandra sir, for his valuable presence through his online platform and also for guidance. So I convey our sincere appreciations to the resource persons of today's talks, Sri Rohit Chakrabarty and Sri Rajesh Puttasomaya, for sharing their knowledge and also for sparing their valuable time. In fact, we know that Mr. Rohit is busy with analysis of his PhD work, and Mr. Rajesh is a busy lawyer working for a big consultancy firm. But when we approached him, then for this webinar, they readily agreed. So thank you very much again for the excellent talks. We hope to hear from you again, sir. So without the participants from across the country, especially from northeastern states, and then Kolkata, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Himachal Pradesh, Goa, etc., on board today, through this digital platform, everything would have been meaningless. So I extend our sincere gratitude to all of you and your support, and for being with us this afternoon. We hope all of you have been benefited from the talks. So, and finally, the webinar has been made possible through the sincere efforts of our fellow colleagues in Shillong and the Freshwater Biology Regional Center, Hyderabad. In fact, this is our very first webinar, and we had some initial hiccups which we could overcome through their dedicated hard work. So a big thanks to all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks to everyone.